Welcome to the Eat, Train, Prosper podcast, where we provide you sustainable training principles for strength and building muscle, effective nutrition practices for improving and maintaining a lean physique, and practical lifestyle habits for becoming a champion of your own health, both inside and out. Hosted by Aaron Straker and Bryan Borstein. Happy Tuesday, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today is Bryan and myself, and we are going to talk a little bit more about some new exercise variation and exercise execution items that we have in our current training. But before we get into that, Bryan, what's the latest with you?
Man, what's wrong with people, So here's what happened. I was talking about this with you before the show started. We had a nanny all lined up to start. Actually, let's backtrack a little bit. My wife's job has been really busy recently, as has my job. So the 3 hours a day of coverage that we're getting from grandma just hasn't been cutting it. So we had this nanny. We had a phone interview with her. Everything went super well. Set up a time for her to come by on Monday, yesterday, to meet the kids and everything. And she just ghosted us, like straight up didn't show up. So I text her at 30 minutes later. And I'm like, hey, just checking if you're still coming. No response. And then this morning, texted her again and was like, hey, I hope nothing really awful happened to you, but that was kind of unprofessional. You could have just texted and said you weren't coming, and we wouldn't have been waiting around for you for an hour. And you mentioned that you have similar experiences with people and how we both feel like it's like the sociopathic gene to just keep people hanging like that, just reach out and cancel. So it was just kind of a shitty start to the week here. So we're pushing through. Graham is here at the moment, and we're recording a podcast. It's snowing again in Boulder. It was 80 degrees for 3 days, and now it's snowing. So I'm back inside. It's 30 degrees outside. What else is going on in the world? I'm just starting Microcycle number 3. So each microcycle is 12 days long now, as we've discussed on prior shows. So I'm on day 25 of my current mesocycle. And I was doing that thing, walking and talking about that short, brief volume workout I had that was split squats and good mornings and leg curls, 5 total work sets. And I did that workout, and then I was supposed to do legs again 3 days later because it goes lower, upper, rest, and then lower again. And I got to that lower workout, and I was still sore from the prior session that was so low volume. And it's interesting because I think this is a good opportunity to talk about soreness and how sore is too sore when it comes to being able to train the same muscle group again, because I think there definitely is a difference. And the type of soreness that I had was the type of soreness where you have to look for it. So if I flexed my quad or if I bent over to touch my toes, then I could tell that my quads and hams were still sore. But if I'm just walking through daily life, I don't really notice it. And so that's the level of soreness where I think it's acceptable to just go ahead and continue with your session. Whereas if you're, you walk upstairs, you walk downstairs, you get up off the toilet or whatever, and you feel these muscles, you can tell that they're sore, then that's too sore. And you should probably lower your volume or your frequency or make some adjustments in your training. So yeah, that's how things are at the moment. What's going on with you?
Yeah, so I'll get into what I have going on. One thing I want to come back to a little bit of your 12-day what do you call them, microcycles or
Microcycle? Yeah, it's like a week. It's like my calendar week, but it's only
your calendar week of training. Yeah, I have a couple questions, especially how it relates to what I wanted to talk about today with exercise variation.
Cool.
But with me, it has gotten hot in Austin. Which I know in the past couple episodes are man, it's kind of cold, and then I'll go to the gym and it'll be 90 and the sun is just rough, and I'm oh boy, it's happening type of thing. So it's been getting hot, which is cool. I've got kind of sometimes I really enjoy a really sweaty, gnarly workout where it's just crazy hot and you're just feel you're working really hard. Mm-hmm. I do still enjoy definitely some of that. I am in week 3 of my mini cut now, so that's going well. I'm really, really enjoying it because I have this kind of grandiose theme around when you create the optimal environment, when you're doing your due diligence, when you're not dieting every 10 weeks and trying all this crazy stuff when you're feeding your body like aptly and doing your, going through the processes and taking care of yourself. Like when you go to diet, like it just works. And that's exactly what's happening. I've increased some very low level activity, adding some walks in the morning. I'm still eating 3,100 calories per day. And I'm just like every few days, like my abs are coming through more. I'm leaner. And I'm like, man, this is great. So it's cool that, I'm kind of now in the practicing what I preach spot, but I mean, I've been consistently adding food week over week since the third week in July. Now it's the second week in April. So I've been like on like a 8 month, increase here. And now that's been going well. So I'm enjoying that. I'm enjoying just the walks, like it's a little bit more of a kick in the ass to get outside and get the steps because like the fat loss is kind of tied to it. Whereas before when you're, eating up, it's really just like, well, I should really get these steps in because I should get these steps in. Now it's like I should get these steps in because I will get leaner from doing so, so there's a little bit more of, I guess, a vanity type of motivator there, but I do it. I have an audiobook, and those are my favorites to do as opposed to like piecing together different podcasts because it's like you get, a couple chapters in like a day or something like that, depending on like the length of the book and stuff. So I've been really, really enjoying that. And now what I kind of want to get into is talking about exercise variation. So I've had some thoughts, myself in terms of at what point are you adding new exercises just for the sake of adding new exercises? And at what point there's like a spectrum, I imagine, right? On the, the far end of the spectrum is a very little variation. Let's just say you only squat. And then on like the complete opposite end, you have like squat, front squat, hack squat, leg press, Bulgarian split squat, walking lunges, reverse Nordics, like you're doing everything. Like where is that kind of, and it's person to person dependent, right? And I guess I should say there's the people who enjoy training, but they enjoy the variation because they get bored. So maybe this is people who are like more drawn to CrossFit with a constantly varied nature. I myself kind of find myself on the other end of the spectrum because the more exercises, the more variation for a particular body part, I think the more kind of movement mastery it takes to perform them well and get the stimulus you're looking for out of it. So I'm kind of reaching this point where I'm like, well, maybe I just do like 3 quad exercises in my microcycle. Maybe I just do like a hack squat, a leg extension, and a Bulgarian split squat, and I just rotate those. Is that bad, subjectively? Am I doing myself a disservice in that? But if I can perform those 3 really, really well and I can get like a crazy stimulus out of it, is it better maybe that I just do Bulgarian split squats one day and push it really, really hard and get this crazy gnarly stimulus from it, as opposed to like, instead of just doing the Bulgarian split squats, maybe I did like walking lunges and like goblet squats, so I did like twice the volume per se, but I got not as direct of a stimulus. And I'm starting to question like, where is that trade-off? And the one thing I want to add before I kick it over to you, right, is right now I'm in a calorie deficit, right? So at my training age, I'm not really adding new muscle at this point. So I'm wondering, is there like a bit of a trade-off where if I just increase frequency and go, what I'm kind of getting at is going with like a full body training style 5 days per week or 5 days per repeat cycle, more or less, it almost averages out to be a week. And I'm getting a really good stimulus from each. Could that be as good, if not possibly slightly better, than adding more variation, getting less stimulus because I'm performing movements that I don't really know how to perform as well as I can perform those, favorites per se. Do you have thoughts about any of this?
There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, I feel like if we would have discussed that these were your questions before the podcast, we would have just like made this entire podcast this, and I would have spent like a half hour doing research and like making notes, because now I feel like I'm going to forget half the things that I thought while you were talking. So,
Yeah, my bad.
But no, this is all really interesting. Have you already designed this example program that you're speculating about?
I have I wrote the legs down.
Okay.
And I'll give you a little bit more. And this is only as far as I've gotten, right? I wanted to kind of superset legs and not legs, quads and hamstrings for legs, right? And I'll always do those first because what we've talked about, like if I just my legs are my priority, right? So I'm going to do them first.
For sure. Yeah.
So I have it set up right now as a hack squat with a glute ham raise on one day, right? Pretty gnarly. The other day I'll have is a leg extension with an RDL, right? So the RDL being the hip hinge, the glute ham raise being like the combination hip hinge and knee flexion, is it? I believe the correct terminology?
For RDL?
No, for the glute ham raise where it kind of hits both.
Glute ham raise would be hip flexion and knee flexion. Yeah.
So it's like the
knee
one
flexion.
hamstring exercise that really hits both
It hits
ends.
both. Yeah, you get both. Yeah.
And then, so the RDL would be with the leg extension, and then having the third session would have a Bulgarian split squat with a seated leg curl. And I kind of paired those up in that manner because for something like a Bulgarian split squat, right, you have to hold on to the weight. And then if I paired that with an RDL, right, your grip's going to get smoked. So just kind of designing like, okay, I'm picking like a knee flexion, right, leg extension, a squat pattern, the hack squat with like an isometric, or not isometric, a unilateral, right, with the Bulgarian split squat.
Yep.
And then I was like, these are my favorites of those. So I'm kind of covering my different movement patterns, pairing them with hamstring specific, again, one at the hip hinge, one at the kind of knee flexion with the seated leg curl, and then the GHR, which pairs both. So kind of covering my bases from a shotgun approach, and then pairing those with how ones I perform really well. Like for instance, I could have, instead of like RDL, I could have done a good morning, but I'm just not really that good at them, and I get a better stimulus from the RDL. And what happens if I really just went really hard on those, because I can get massive stimulus from those if I only do like maybe 4 sets on each of those. Like I can crush myself, and knowing that I'm at like a lower food intake, and I'm just like really starting to circle thoughts around it. And obviously this was very person dependent, because for someone maybe Bulgarian split squat you don't perform really well, and walking lunges would be better. But just kind of what are your thoughts there more?
What is your intended frequency on those? You said you want to do those pairings how many days a week?
So I would do one pairing per day, and then how I have it set up in my head right now is 2 days on, 1 day off, and repeat. So it would be like
So you're doing legs every 3 days, or legs every 2 out of 3 days? You're gonna die. You're not, that's I feel like you're not gonna recover. I mean, you're choosing eccentrically dominated movements like a Bulgarian split squat, a GHR, and a RDL. I couldn't recover from that. I couldn't even recover from doing those like Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Okay.
Like in a week.
Yeah.
Personally, like
Yeah.
like you said 4 sets of each. I was like, maybe if you're doing 1 set of each, like maybe you could recover, but even then I feel like you're not going to recover back-to-back days.
So that's my thought of how I was designing, is I could do like 1 day on, 1 day off. But that would get me about 4 days of training per week. And from like what is Aaron going to do with his time? Just don't really kind of like that.
I feel like you're not going to recover. I mean, I think we had an episode where we talked about like the different training splits, and we talked about some of the drawbacks of full body training, or some of the things that you need to be aware of. And one of them was putting compound leg movements in back-to-back days, regardless of whether it's like a hip hinge versus a squat pattern. Like maybe if you went like hack squat to one day and like GHR the next day, like you could do that. I think the only way you successfully make it through a full body routine is to have a day that's much more quad dominant with maybe like a very small hamstring movement, and then the other leg day is more hamstring, like hip hinge dominant with very, very small, like isolated quad movement. I think trying to put big compound movements on back-to-back days is just going to be a setup, especially in a deficit when you don't have the caloric support. I can't imagine you're going to recover from that.
Yeah, that was that's my fear, basically, right? Or having to start at a much lower weight that I could, just to kind of feel it out, right? Because it's a new stimulus. I've never really trained the full body. It's been kind of enticing me for a bit. So I'm interested to see like how it goes. And I think at most would be the 2 days, and then I'd always take that third day off, 100%.
Well, I'm very excited to hear how it goes if you do implement it. And I think that we should use this still as like a springboard for other discussion into kind of some of the other questions you were asking around exercise variation and like what would be optimal.
Well, so what I wanted to, and I didn't bring this up, apologies, but I know it's not optimal, right? But in the context of I'm in a deficit, I'm not going to add muscle if I'm just want to retain as much as I can. And this was the other thing I didn't bring up. Apologies. I was thinking like, what is something I can work on while I'm in a deficit, right? Because I'm not going to be increasing hypertrophy, probably increasing strength. I could work on my work capacity in a deficit. Because like, let's face it, I haven't been doing a lot of cardio. I just been lifting weights. Like I'm in decent shape compared to like Gen Pop. But as far as like an athlete, like I'm going to vomit and, pass out probably pretty easily if I had to do something really athletic. So it'd be an easy way for me to just like increase my work capacity with like density of kind of training as well, and work in a different type of modality. So these are just like some kind of theories and thoughts I was having. I was like, okay, I have, 6 to 10 weeks probably where calories will be lower. What is something else I can try and improve on in that time? And that was what kind of landed me here with like the higher frequency, and just kind of different training style. If I have like one exercise per day for that body part, and I pick one that I know I perform and feel well, and then just like, rotating those on a short cycle as opposed to like a longer. If I'm doing like 6 different workouts, if I only have like 3 to 4, I rotate through. So that was my question about with your 12-day cycle, like how much variation of movements is in there.
Yeah. So I actually think, like, to your point, I actually think that less movement selection is best. With adherence not being a consideration, or personal preference, and you're just talking about optimality, like it is most optimal for you to select the 2 to 4 best movements for each muscle group that you feel the most for you, and considering things like having a stretch position movement and having a shortened position movement. So the example there would be like having an incline dumbbell curl where you're in a stretch position, but also having like a preacher curl or a spider curl where you're in a contracted position. I think it has been shown that you can work muscles through these different angles and achieve different stimulus. Looking at a dumbbell fly and a cable crossover, they're both chest adduction movements, but one of them is overloaded in the stretched position and one of them is overloaded in the contracted position. So that doesn't mean that one's better than the other. It just means that when you're going through your movement selection, making sure that you have awareness around that. So maybe if you have like a incline dumbbell press where you're getting a stretch at the bottom, maybe you don't do the dumbbell fly this cycle and you throw in the cable crossover, and that those two become maybe your main bread and butter chest movements, and you just kind of have like one session where you focus on incline dumbbell bench and one session where you focus on cable crossover, and maybe you have a third session and you have like a flat barbell bench or something like that, right? So 3 movements is totally fine. So I think that choosing the 3 movements, obviously that feel best for you, but also keeping in mind some of those things about the angle of the movement itself. Like whenever I write programs, I always make sure that we work muscles through the different angles that exist, through the different shortened and end range positions. So like an RDL is an end range position, right? It takes you through the stretch, whereas like a leg curl takes you through the contracted position. Same thing with like a squat, where it's overloaded in the mid range, but it takes you through the stretch position at the bottom. Whereas a leg extension focuses specifically on the contracted position. So I think in your program design, you had a really good job. You did a really good job of kind of including all of those. So I was more speaking as just like a general lesson to everybody out there. But I also think that within kind of that spectrum of those 3 movements that you choose, I think there's going to be a time where those three movements are no longer effective for you. And our boy, Mike Israetel, he talks about this a lot. And he just says, like, one movement might have the best stimulus to fatigue ratio for you for a month or 2 months or 3 months or 4 months. But at some point, you might just beat that horse into the ground and it's no longer giving you the benefits that you need. And now suddenly maybe the leg press was the one that you were riding, but now maybe it's hack squat, and you just get in the hack squat and you're like, oh my god, like that feels just so smooth and perfect, right? Or maybe you've been doing barbell bench, and or dumbbell flies. Let's use the example I was going before. You're doing dumbbell flies and you're like getting a lot out of them and you're crushing them, but after a couple months you're like, oh, that stretch position is starting to irritate my shoulder a little bit. Like, I just feel like it's not giving me the same return on my investment as it was. So maybe that's a great opportunity for you to switch over to a cable crossover, which is going to work that shortened position. So there's a lot of different ways you can use variation. But another piece that you brought up was kind of just being able to work those ones consistently. And I think that accuracy of data is an important one as well, because when you have so much variation, it makes it extremely difficult for you to track all the data. And is the variation that you're doing creating a positive effect? Would you be getting a better benefit if you had less variation? And these are things that kind of you need to test out. But we do know from the strength world, like powerlifting, squat, bench, dead, that when you focus specifically on certain movements, you get better at performing those movements. Neural adaptations occur, motor learning occurs, and you will more effectively be able to work your intended musculature just by becoming better at that movement. And in a bodybuilding sense, it's building better mind-muscle connection. Like, if you only have 3 movements you have to focus on, then you can put all of that mind-muscle connection and the focus into the execution of those movements, instead of having to remind yourself at the beginning of every session that, oh yeah, I was driving my elbow this way, or I had the tension in my pinky, or like all the different variants that like you're not going to put in your notebook, but when you're doing it, you know it. You're like, oh, if I pull with that angle and do that thing with my elbow, like that's the way the movement is supposed to feel. And then you like get to it the next week, and because you have so many fucking movements in your program, you forget that was what you wanted to do, and you don't even figure it out again until the second or third set. And then you're like, next week I'm going to remember that, right?
Exactly. And those are kind of my thoughts. Like, if I just pick a few, like 3 exercises per body part that I know I do really well, and rotate them, if I can really just work on those like neural adaptations and performing them like really, really well, and just swing for the fences kind of on those and really get after it. And that's basically my entire thought here is like, well, I want to see what that's like. And then I know it's like, I can't do it. I can do it for maybe 8 weeks, 10 weeks, maybe 12. But after that, it's like, yeah, I need to add some variation back in, leg press or different things. Yeah, it was really cool to kind of just chew on that and see what your thoughts were about, reducing variation specifically to just concentrate on what I know I can perform well, and or kind of how that could be extrapolated to listeners or anyone else.
Yeah, using variation as a tool. So it's not something that we throw variation in for the sake of variation. We just throw variation in because the consistency and the feedback that we're getting from the movements that we have, the core movements that we're using, is now not as good as it was. And then to answer your question about my program with my 12-day microcycle, I actually have a lot of movement crossover where, because I have these 4 different sessions, 4 upper and 4 lower. So for an example, my quad movements, I have the Bulgarian split squat, I have the hack leg press thing, and I have leg extension. And
Same things I talked about.
yeah. So I have the same ones that you're doing, and those are the only 3 that I really do. But I do the hack press as my focus movement on one day for mechanical overload, and then I do the Bulgarian split squat for mechanical overload on another day. So I have 2 days that are focused on mechanical overload, and then I have 2 days that are focused on pre-exhaust. So I use the hack press again on day 3, but I use it as a secondary movement after the leg extension. So I go directly from leg extension to hack press. So it's a completely different stimulus. I'm using like 2/3 of the weight that I used on the first day, and I'm doing a higher rep range too. And then on the last leg day, I do pre-exhaust again. So I reuse the leg extension for a second time, and I superset that with, it's now currently heels elevated safety bar squats. I like it. It's been fine. I've been playing around with that movement. Part of me wants to turn it into a safety squat bar lunge, like a reverse lunge.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to play with whatever that secondary movement is in the pre-exhaust, because the other movements and days all pretty much just stay the same and don't change. And I do similar things with my hamstrings too, where I use the leg curl 3 out of my 4 days actually. And one of the days is pre-exhaust. One of the days I use it as a primary movement, and 2 of the days I use it as a secondary movement. So on the day that I do good mornings, I do the leg curl first, but I don't do it as a pre-exhaust like directly to it. But then I do have a day where I use the leg curl as pre-exhaust. So I use the leg curl in a bunch of different ways, and I also use it in one day where I focus on the stretched position at the top, and one day where I focus on the contracted position at the bottom. So I'll either pause at the top or pause at the bottom. So I'm kind of able to create some variation and increase the strength profile using the same movement, but just by pausing or altering execution slightly on different days, or placement within exercise order.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that you explained that really, really well. And from what I was hoping to get out of what you were going to say, it is perfect for what I was looking to say. I think it was very, very educational.
Sweet.
Awesome.
Well, that more or less covers exercise variation. And then I have been talking a lot on my stories and within kind of my Facebook groups for my programs. There's been a lot of focus on split squats specifically, or lunges, any kind of single leg squat, and the prioritization of the glute or the quad. So kind of the basic premise of this, and we talked about this in the movement exercise execution thing that we did, the episode number 3. But anytime that we want to prioritize the quad, the main focus is always ankle flexion. So that's looking at creating an angle in which the knee travels over the toe and the shin angles out forward over the toe as well. So the more ankle flexion that you can create, the more quad dominant you're going to be. Alternatively, if you're looking to target the glute, you don't really want ankle flexion, just because that's going to push everything into the quad. So we're going to shift the shin back. We're going to keep more of a vertical shin, and generally we'll go with a bit longer of a stance, because the point of the bottom range of these movements is to stretch the intended muscle. So in the quad dominant version, when the knee pushes forward, the intention is to stretch the quad at the bottom, much like in the other version where the shin stays vertical, the intention is to stretch the glute at the bottom of the rep. So we're reaching back with the leg to create as much distance as possible between the knee and the hip in going backwards. And in the other one, we're trying to create as much distance between the knee and the hip traveling forward. So the other aspect of that is to keep the torso over the quad dominant leg as you're pressing through the ascent. So you can think about this as like if you're doing a split squat and your knee is far over your toe and you go to stand up, if the first thing that happens is your knee kicks back and you ascend up with a more vertical torso, then you just created distance up by using your hips with hip flexion. So that's essentially going to engage your glutes more. Whereas what we want to do is stay in the quad. So if we can keep that torso angled over the knee and keep the body over the knee as long as possible, it's going to force the quad to do the work as you press up through the kind of front mid part of the foot. And then to even kind of push that further, you can even avoid hip flexion at the top of your rep if you're going for quad dominance. So when you get to the top of your split squat, your torso can kind of just still stay over the top of your knee and never actually kind of straighten up at the top. Because once you straighten up at the top, you're essentially just doing that by flexing your glutes. And then alternatively, in the other option where you're looking to actually target the glutes, then you want to keep the torso up but you don't necessarily want to come to full extension at the top with the quad. So like in the quad dominant version, when you stay over the top, you actually want to flex the quad at the top. So you push all the way through your leg and the knee locks out. But in the glute dominant version, if we can keep a soft knee at the top, then we can actually keep tension on the glute as we go through that movement pattern. So that I don't know if that explained very well.
It does. So what I'd like to do for the listeners is to kind of just like back it up a little bit and add like just like bullet point cues for each. So let's start with the glute, since you just did the glute.
Yep.
It's like really simple. Let me try and explain it based on what you gave me, and then you can be like, no, you're wrong. Let's do this. So for a glute dominant split squat, you would like to have your front foot a little bit more out in front of you so that your knee does not push as far over your toes. Your shin stays a little bit more vertical. Mm-hmm. You would like to keep your torso a little bit more vertical. And then you do not want to lock out that full knee or that front knee fully on the when you stand up, so that you can keep a little bit more tension in the glute. Did I?
Yeah, correct.
Summarize that well?
Sounds really good.
Okay,
yep.
Awesome. And then conversely, if you would like to do split squats to more appropriately or more advantageously target your quadricep, you'd like to take a little bit shorter of a distance stance, allow your knee to travel far over your toes as long as your heel is still on the ground. Mm-hmm. And then you would like a little bit forward of a torso lean. And then when you're standing up, you don't want your knee to shift back, to a more vertical shin position. When you start the movement, you'd like to keep your toe out over the toe. As you ascend up, keep a little bit more forward of that torso lean. And then you really want to kind of not like crazy lock out that front leg, but reach full extension of your front leg so that you bias more of your quadricep.
Yep, keeping the weight over the leg the whole time as you stand up and possibly avoiding hip flexion at the top, or hip extension rather. That sounds pretty good.
I have a question for you about split squats and your opinion here. So, do you think it would be more advantageous, less advantageous to do them completely freestanding while you work on balance, or to use your off hands, I guess, depending on how you load it, to help with like balance and stability?
You probably know what my answer is based on the variation that I use. But the thing is that anytime that there's a distraction in a movement that's loaded, it's going to take a little bit of your mind away from creating that mind-muscle connection. So as long as you're able to load the movement effectively, I like the use of some way to balance. The one consideration with using some way to balance is that you don't use more and more pressure against that object week to week and think that you're progressing the movement. So setting some sort of standard of, if I feel myself actually pressing, like my objective when I do it and I hold the power rack is that I don't want to ever actually be pushing through my hand down onto it. I kind of just try to let my hand just rest there, and I only grab it like absolutely when needed, sort of. And I think that I do a pretty good job on it because my rep speed slows down at the same rate that I would kind of expect it to. And I have grinding reps at the end that, have the same resistance curve that I would expect them to have. So I don't think that I'm using my hands excessively. But that would kind of be just the one consideration there.
Yeah, I agree. Whenever I'm doing like a Bulgarian split squat or a rear foot elevated split squat, I love being able to hold on to something. What I do try and do is not take an overhand grip. I'll use like a side grip if I'm like grabbing the side of a rack, or if I had like at the gym I'm at now, there's like a railing in front of me, I'll use an underhand grip so that I can't really I'm not going to like pull up on it. But I find that I have to use so much less load without something I can hold on to, just because I'm spending so much effort trying to balance. And that it doesn't allow me to really overload the muscle like I want to. And I mean, split squats are insane. The last thing I will add, this is, a personal finding anecdotally of mine, is I always do my split squats for targeting my quads, right? That's just my goal. but I mean, it crushes my glutes all the time still.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. Without a doubt. I mean, the anytime anyone asks me like, hey, if I bias the quad, like, why am I still getting sore in my glutes? Or if I'm biasing the glutes, why am I still getting sore in my quad? I'm like, dude, this movement is a motherfucker. Like, you're gonna get sore everywhere.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't even matter. So no matter how you perform it, if you go through a full range of motion, you're going to get both quad and glute. For me to get sore at all in my quads, I have to do it the quad dominant way. If I do it the glute dominant way, I get just absolutely smashed in my glutes, and I'm just kind of like, okay, like, yeah, I guess like my quads worked a little bit. So I personally have to, like, as you do probably, I'm sure, because we're both posterior dominant, but I have to really actually put a ton of effort into making sure that I'm pressing through the front of my foot and staying over my knee and like driving ankle dorsiflexion and like all of these different things, just to make sure that my quads get as sore as my glutes do.
Yeah, I agree. It's a challenge I have all the time.
Yeah. So another thing I wanted to talk about briefly was RDLs, or good mornings, and creating glute versus hamstring dominance. And so I have a question for you, if this is a good way of describing this phenomenon. So you're doing an RDL or a good morning, and you are going down and you reach kind of the limit of your hamstring flexibility, but you can almost, what I call, sinking into it. You can almost like keep sinking into it. And it's not that you're doing it by sending your knees forward or involving your quads, but by sinking into it, you're kind of getting this like deeper stretch through the lower glute and upper hamstring area. It creates maybe an extra like 2 inches of depth from the limit of the hamstring range. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say that?
I mean, in theory, in personal practice, I don't think that I can. And here's why. I think I have a tendency to, when I reach that range, it comes from my lower back. Yeah.
So, well, I mean, but how about the hips traveling horizontally? How about that notion?
So I mean, when I perform those movements, my main kind of cue point is to try and shift my hips back, right? If I'm descending and my ass is going backwards, I'm kind of creating that tension. And then once my ass kind of stops moving back, I find whenever I try and go deeper, it's just my lower back, like creating space, which is like not what I want.
So I feel very much a sensation, and I've seen this in a lot of videos of clients and stuff too, where there's like a very distinct kind of like, okay, your hips have like stopped moving back, but you can almost, I just call it sinking into it. And it's maybe like a way to describe it would be like you're at the end range and then you kind of send your knees out. And by sending the knees out slightly or by externally rotating through the feet, you can get like an extra 2 inches of additional range of motion without going into the low back.
Okay.
That's probably how I would describe it. But anyway, that really is like the difference between a hamstring dominant or a glute dominant RDL or good morning. And so when I was over at N1 doing my session with them, 2 or 3 weeks ago, they have this new thing that's called they don't call it a floating RDL. I just named it floating RDL because it makes more sense to me. I don't know what they just call it an RDL. They're just like, this is how you're supposed to do RDLs. But the idea is that the bar kind of floats in front of your body a little bit. Instead of keeping it in super proximity to the thighs and the shins the whole time, you kind of let it carry forward maybe 2 or 3 inches. And I call this a floating RDL. I wish somebody would actually name it and not just think that it's just like the proper way to do an RDL, because it's hard to describe when it doesn't have a name. But the N1 guys, they just perform it that way. So I tried this the other day in my programming. Instead of my regular RDL, I did a floating RDL. And it's wild. So their rationalization is that it creates a longer moment arm.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah. And the bar travels further away from the axis point, which puts more emphasis on the hips. So I tried it and my shit was wrecked, man. And I know that that's like, it's a novel thing. Like I should be wrecked because it's new and like I wasn't used to it and whatever. but I was shaking. Like I don't usually shake when I work out for any reason, and I legitimately was shaking trying to lock reps out doing them like this. So I googled what shaking means, and it literally means that you've exhausted so many motor neurons that they just stop firing, and other neurons are like
Oh,
trying to take over, and your body's like trying to figure this map out.
I've always wondered what that is when people, especially people reaching out like the top of a deadlift and stuff, where they're just like
Yeah.
the bar starts
Yeah,
like
because they just
bouncing.
like
And, yeah,
they've just fucked everything up and they just like have nothing left. So
yeah.
everything's like turned off. So I've like never experienced that before, to be honest, and it was weird. And my hamstrings were really sore afterwards. And I didn't need nearly as much weight. So I was doing it with 295 for sets of 7. And, for a normal RDL, I'd be doing like 100 pounds more than that almost, maybe 75 to 80 pounds more than that. So that was pretty cool. And I'm not necessarily at a point that I'm ready to like start being like, hey, everybody should do this RDL this way. Because I think that it does in some ways increase the risk of injury. I mean, you have to have a really, really, really good body awareness to be able to let a loaded barbell travel away from your center of mass like that and not compromise spinal position. So that's kind of the way I feel on it. Like, I think if you're a super advanced athlete and you want to check it out, like, go see the work that the N1 guys are doing and learn how to do it from them. It's a much shorter range of motion too, because when that bar travels away and the hips push back and you create that like super long moment arm, it really is like the bar gets to about the kneecaps for me, maybe like 1 inch below the kneecaps, but I'm definitely not going to like mid shin or anything like that. So,
Question for you: when you're
yep.
performing this specific type, do you find it is more challenging on like your lats and back to kind of hold it in that position since you're floating it out a little bit?
No, it's actually less. I mean, it's more upper back, maybe like rear delt and rhomboid trying to
Okay,
hold it. But like in the way where you keep the bar close in proximity, I feel like is really strong on the lats because you have to like force that
like
bar in.
sweep it
In
in.
this way, it's actually just hanging. Like it's kind of just hanging there from
Gotcha.
from arm's length, you know?
Okay, that does make sense because you're just like hanging it straight down. You're not trying to keep it in close.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're just shifting your hips back, and when the hips don't go back anymore, you come forward and ascend.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think it would only be my recommendation for someone who, like I said, with super great body awareness and they have very good control of their midline. But like I said, I tried it and it was pretty rad.
That is cool. Yeah, I've seen people do it with like kettlebells before, where they practice like floating it out a little bit. But I mean, it's such a lesser load. I'm sure at it, like it only gets exponentially extrapolated when you're using like a heavier load like that. It's demand on your quads and glutes for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. Do you think we covered that one pretty good?
Yeah, we crushed it. I have one other exercise execution tidbit to throw in there that I thought that I just figured out today, and
Let's do it.
hopefully I'm not like the last person to figure this out. But I was doing my one arm cable lateral raises right before we got on the show, and I had this like epiphany that if I think in my head about trying to keep the cable as low as possible for as long as possible, that it like smashed my lateral delt way more than when I think about raising the cable up. So I just like think like, okay, if the cable stays low as long as possible, then my arm actually doesn't raise until the cable comes out far enough that like becomes a requirement versus the act of like trying to raise the cable up, which I found engaged a lot more of like kind of the trap area than just sweeping out to the side.
So I'm like over here trying to do it with my arms in my head for you guys watching on YouTube. So is it thought that like you're kind of like pushing down and then just letting like your basically your skeletal structure and like you're just going through the motion of like here's how my arm raises, but you're thinking about like pushing your hand like down towards the ground and then like point or wherever your fingers point, right? And then trying to just like let that go through that motion. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I more would describe it as thinking about trying to get as wide as possible versus trying to get vertical.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense.
So anyways, it was like I did it and I was just like, whoa, I've never felt like that lower part of like my lateral delt like that before. And that's the part that's going to like insert into the arm and give the appearance, you know. So
Yeah.
so that was a pretty cool finding. And then yeah, we can totally move into to the next part of our
Yeah. I will
discussion.
try those today.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Use the cuff. If you don't use the cuff, you make sure you do.
We don't have a cuff.
Oh, brutal. The cuff is so rad.
I know. We do not have a cuff, unfortunately.
No worries.
Yeah. Let's answer this one Q&A question we have, and I think that'll be good. So the question I got this week on Instagram was, I would love to hear you and Bryan talk about alcohol from a training and body composition perspective. Bryan, do you want to start us off with your thoughts about alcohol?
Sure. I don't really drink much anymore. There's a lot of science about how alcohol is really bad, you know, for your testosterone and all the other things that I know Aaron's going to go into. But I'll also say that Aaron and I both drank a lot in the early CrossFit days, and I drank a lot in college, and I was still pretty jacked, and Aaron was still pretty jacked too. So in the pursuit of optimality, it's clearly an awful idea. But I do think that there are ways where if you're just like a lifestyle dude and you want to live like a cool life and you want to be able to go out and like hang out with your friends and maybe go to Vegas every now and then, every couple years and do a bachelor party or something like that. I think there are ways that you can include that in and have it not be completely destructive to your life. Of course, if you're a bodybuilder, you're going to get on stage. If you're on a diet, I mean, there's so many caveats that like the list could go on forever. But you know, practically, there are definitely ways that you can have a drink or two a week and fit it into your life and your lifestyle and have it not have like a massive negative effect on your overall result, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. That was really well put, Bryan. I'm going to try and cover this from a few different angles. First, I mean, like Bryan said, from 18 to 26, I drank very frequently. On the weekends a lot, like we partied, you know, we lived by the beach and there was a CrossFit gym and stuff. It was just lifestyle. Bryan and I both still made a ton of progress and gains, you know, in those years. One thing I will say that I think helped us in that regard, we ate a lot of food. We weren't like super, super lean, stage lean or anything like that. But we trained, you know, 6 days per week, usually consistently, and ate a lot of food. So I think that kind of helped in that regard. I don't drink anymore. I gave it up last year. It's been about a year and a half. And for me, it just doesn't add value to my life, right? And that I think is where my decision came from that. That being said, I think alcohol can fit in your life in different ways. I don't think it's something that you need to remove by any means to make progress. The one thing I will say where I feel like it has much more noticeable negative effects is when you are dieting. And that is because when you are dieting, you just have smaller margins, and alcohol is going to make those even smaller. So when you're dieting, your sleep becomes ever more important for recovery. Alcohol is going to impair your body's ability to produce a good night of sleep. It is going to negatively impact your sex hormones, notably testosterone, again, coming with recovery from training as well because of that sleep. Adherence. Alcohol makes your decision tree a little looser, let's say, so it's easier to, you know, be less adherent with your diet because you've been out drinking. Another aspect is just making up for the calories, right? If you are going to have 5 drinks, that's pretty much 500 calories. And then if you're already in a deficit, trying to find an extra 500 calories, this is obviously just an example, it just allows you to eat much less food. And then you know, let's say you do train, you have 500 less calories you normally would. You fill that with 500 calories of alcohol. Alcohol is going to change your fuel utilization and oxidation when it's in your body. Couple that with a night of sleep, a bad night of sleep because of the alcohol. There's just, you know, downstream cascades of how this works. Not to even get into its impacts on your liver, and liver is important with like blood glucose and metabolization of different nutrients. So it's much more than just like the calories in, calories out type of deal of how alcohol can impact you. Some beneficial notes I will say, if you do want to drink and be social, there are some really simple strategic optimizations that you can make to lessen the caloric load when you are drinking alcohol. So instead of having like, a margarita or a Long Island iced tea or something like that, aiming for simpler drinks, maybe like a whiskey neat or like a tequila, soda, lime, or different things where you can just significantly reduce the caloric load, which is not going to impact you so much from like the sleep, the fuel oxidation prioritization and things like that, but you can reduce your caloric intake just from not drinking a bunch of the sugary drinks and stuff as well. So again, at your end ranges of like optimality and really trying to maximize fat loss and stuff, I would say if you're dieting for like 12 weeks, maybe skipping alcohol for 12 weeks would be a great idea. A lot of my clients will stop drinking for the duration of us, working together. And a lot of people are really grateful on the back end for taking that. And it's not something that I push my clients to do. I just provide them simple information on like, this is what alcohol does. This is how it changes your, fuel utilization. This is how you have to make room for it in your diet. And then when they're like, oh, wow, that's a lot, I don't want to do that, I'll just kind of stop having that glass of wine Wednesday through Friday nights when I come home from work type of thing. But it is not something I think you need to remove to make progress. I think tons of people keep it in their life really well and have a balance, and they drink because they value it and enjoy it. And I'm not saying you should or need to remove that by any means. Anything else you want to add on the end of that, Bryan?
No, I mean, you crushed that. You actually brought up a bunch of points that I didn't even think about. So
cool.
That was really good. And yeah, I think that, as long as people know that they can still make gains if they drink, in small, slight to moderation amounts, that's cool. And then just don't become an alcoholic, because then you'll probably stop training.
Yeah. And the last thing I do want to add is if you are in a super stressful period of your life, maybe work is crushing you, you're going through like a divorce, or maybe you're you have a newborn and your sleep is really down and things like that. These are periods where less will be more with the alcohol, specifically because of how it's going to negatively impact your training, or sorry, not your training, the hormones that are already going to be negatively impacted because of the less sleep and stressful situation. So the times where people feel like, man, I'm so stressed out, I need a drink, those are cases where it's actually going to make things a little bit worse, and you'd be better off with like finding different ways to lessen the stress in your life with maybe some adaptogens, or doing things like getting outside on a walk or something really, really simple. But last bit there on alcohol.
Totally crushed it.
Awesome. Anything else you want to add on this episode, Bryan?
Nope, nothing else, man. How about you?
Cool. I'm good.
Yep.
So with that, guys, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper, and Bryan and I will talk to you guys next week. Thank you so much for listening to Eat, Train, Prosper. If you found this episode valuable, please subscribe or share us with your friends. You can find more from Aaron at strakernutritionco.com and more from Bryan at evolvedtrainingsystems.com. Talk to you guys next time.